Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast, College Football Preview Edition. So today I am joined by Tyler King to break it all down. Tyler, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. We got a pretty exciting weekend upon us in college football here locally, starting Friday with the Buffs and Stanford. But let's check back first with last week. The Buffs go on the road and beat Arizona State in a even though Coach Deion Sanders wasn't thrilled with the game, and we'll get your opinion on that in a second. But for a team that won one game last year, winning a road game in conference, I think is a big step. And I was wondering if you felt the same way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they were only like a 3.5 point favorite in the game going in, and we talked last week about how it's been a long time since CU was a road favorite against anybody, let alone in the Pac-12. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things to work on. This is far from a perfect team. We kind of knew that going into the year. We had them at 4 wins. I think you and I both did in our preseason predictions. Just kind of not knowing what to expect for this team, and they're already at 4 wins. They're 4-2. They were never going to beat Oregon and USC this season. That was just not going to happen. But now they've got this first Pac-12 win under their belt for Deion Sanders, and now they've got another game they should win this week against Stanford, which we'll get much more into that later. But they have a chance to be 5-2 heading into the bye. And really, if you told any CU fan that going into the year, I'm sure they would be more than thrilled with that possibility to be 5-2. I mean, the last time they were 5-2 was 2018. I mean,
Yep.
we all know how that season ended. Obviously, they were 5-2, up by like 30 at halftime at home to Oregon State, blow that game, and then lose the rest of the way to miss a bowl game in the year that McIntyre's fired. So I don't think that's going to happen this year. I do think they do have a good shot to get to bowl eligibility, but which, I mean, in and of itself, for any coach across the country, regardless of the state of the program you're taking over, getting to a bowl game in your first season should be a success, kind of no matter where you are. But especially obviously at CU after watching, like you mentioned, the 1-11 season that we saw last season up in Boulder, which was just the roster was about as barren as it can get for a Power 5 team, and obviously things have changed pretty quickly here. And I think fans, regardless of if the season doesn't end perfectly, should still be pretty happy with how this has gone so far.
And I think, if they get the 6 wins, which I think we both think they will now, any bowl game is going to be dying to take them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the suitors are going to be lining up. It'll be interesting to kind of see which representatives are going to be at these CU games in the coming weeks and months as the season winds down. We're halfway through the season already, which is pretty crazy. We're 6 games in, but yeah, bowls are going to be lining up to get the Buffs because whatever game gets them is going to be. I think like I wrote last week, I wrote my insider about how key that game was against Arizona State for CU's potential bowl eligibility. But I was talking about how I think CU's bowl game, if they get there, will be the most watched and hyped bowl game that's not in the playoff. For sure. Like that's just what's going to happen, especially, ESPN had some projections last week where Air Force was playing CU in like the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl, which would just be awesome. I mean, that would be one of the best non-playoff bowl games we've ever seen. So I think that would be, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves here, but I mean, just thinking of that possibility would be something else.
Just real quick, I don't think CU wants any part of Air Force.
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think they should. No, I think Air Force might be, as I wrote about last week, I think Air Force might be too good for a bowl game with CU, even if everyone's dying to get CU in their bowl game. I think Air Force might end up being too good for CU.
We'll definitely touch a little bit on Air Force when we get to the West and CSU, because that's them in Wyoming. That's a huge game this week. But
yeah, absolutely.
Real quick, more on the CU beating Arizona State. Another just terrible slow start. Like they were down early again. Kind of rallied late, and then so two things. Like the slow start is bad, but also I think Deion's comments probably came from them giving up that 96-yard drive there at the end. He could not have been happy with that.
No, he was very less than pleased, I'll say, post game. He was my main story from Tempe was, about Deion's message post game to the team. He said the first words out of his mouth were wonderful win, but after that there was nothing positive about what he said post game. He was really unhappy with the way they played. Obviously, giving up that 96-yard game tying touchdown drive with 50 seconds to go, like you mentioned, was a part of that. They've gotten up, they're gone down again for the third straight week. They've given up a touchdown on the opening drive, and they've failed to score on their opening offensive series. So it's been a slow start on both sides of the ball, and that's something I'll be writing about for Thursday's Denver Gazette tomorrow. Is about, obviously, we've talked a lot about the offensive slow starts, and they haven't scored on their first possession since TCU in week 1. But I mean, the defense has been good enough to some slow starts here recently too, with like I mentioned, allowing touchdowns on the first defensive series in the last 3 games. So they've really got to get better as a first quarter team, and obviously that plays into Deion's unhappiness with how they played, and Shador getting sacked another 5 times, I'm sure did that as well. And maybe just the overall response to how things were going, and they pulled it out late, but it didn't feel like a positive day for them. Which getting a win is positive, but obviously Deion, as he said post game, has much higher expectations than what they showed this past weekend.
So a couple positives from the game, though. Let's talk about, first of all, Shador was great again.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever. He's got ice in his veins. We'll talk about someone else who has ice in their veins in just a minute. But Javon Antonio, just out of nowhere, you tweeted that he was warming up with tight ends, and then all of a sudden became their best receiver. And I saw so much on Twitter like, wait, who's Antonio? The depth there is just surreal.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that even though they haven't had Travis Hunter these last 3 games, that they've been just kind of finding guys at wide receiver to make plays. Obviously, that was Omarion Miller against USC with his kind of record-breaking 196-yard performance in the second half of that game. But yeah, Javon Antonio was the guy that was benched for Omarion Miller in that USC game. He ran a wrong route. He just didn't look comfortable out there. He had been dealing with some injuries earlier in the season, made his return for the Oregon game, got in, had a couple catches in garbage time there, and got the start against USC, but, was not playing well, got benched, like I mentioned. And yeah, he was warming up with the tight ends at Arizona State. I was like kind of stunned to see that. I mean, he's a bigger guy. This is his last year of eligibility. So maybe that was like a conversation earlier last week about, hey, if Omarion's going to be starting and playing at wide receiver, then can I try something else? Because obviously he's got, goals to play at the next level. And if he's not playing at wide receiver for this team, that's going to be tough to, find a spot in the next level at wide receiver. But, Omarion Miller had like 1 catch, I think, in the game against Arizona State.
Yeah, 1 for 9 yards. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like an out route. I remember that play. And then Antonio gets in there like late in the third quarter. It was like that was like his second or third play on the field that he caught the touchdown pass in the fourth quarter, and he went on to have a couple more catches. Obviously, the big one to start the game-winning field goal drive was 40 yards. He just kind of gets past the busted coverage and is wide open downfield. So, I mean, they're going to need to keep getting performances out of some guys, because it seems like there's just some inconsistent play up and down the roster from guys not named Shador Sanders, like we've mentioned. But that's a positive sign if a guy like Javon Antonio, who gets benched a week before, is able to respond and have the type of impact at the end of the game like he did. So
you wrote about ice cold Alejandro Mata, I guess.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful. But he drills this winning kick. Coach Sanders tells him to dance. So we'll have to rate his dancing skills. But they've gone through all this stuff with kicker, like, it was Jace Feely for a while. I'm sorry, what was the guy's name who was doing kickoffs and did not have a good night?
Christian Palazzo.
Yeah. So they've used like 3 different kickers. Like, is Mata just the guy? Like, it feels like he just needs to be the guy.
Yeah, it feels like it. I mean, his range doesn't seem like it's much more than the 43-yarder. That was his career best attempt that he had to win the game. So we'll see if there's a long field goal situation. I think it was earlier in the game. They had like a 4th and 8 or 4th and 9 from like the 29-yard line, which would have been like a 45, 46-ish field goal. And they went for it and got it. That was on the first touchdown drive that they had.
Yep.
But I don't know if they're going to be going for any long field goals with how inconsistent Feely's been. He's supposed to be the guy that is capable of doing that, but he hasn't. He just doesn't seem like he has much confidence. He's not even booting the kickoffs into the end zone. They've had trouble with that. which was another thing Deion was frustrated with post game. He's like, how do we have 2 kickoffs go out of bounds, whatever. So they've got some struggles there, but for at least for the 45-yard field goals and the extra points, it seems like Mata's their guy. I mean, they call him don't miss, Mata don't miss.
Yeah.
He's got all the nicknames, and everyone seems to have confidence in him. He came with from Jackson State. He only had a field goal and an extra point blocked last season, so he didn't technically miss at all last season. So, I guess he'll be the guy going forward. It seems like, for sure.
So real quick before we talk about the Pac-12 a little bit, update on Travis Hunter.
Yeah, so it looks like he's going to be back this week. It seems like this was
off the field. I don't think.
Yeah, no, yeah, they might have. They're definitely, that's a challenge with Travis Hunter, is trying to keep him off the football field. This was the original timeline that was reported. 3 weeks, and with that lacerated liver, and Deion Sanders had said last week when asked about this that he had hoped to keep him out through this Stanford game, because obviously the bye is coming up next week. And then he'd be back for the October 28th game at UCLA. But it looks like he's going to be back this week. He was out at practice the last couple days in pads yesterday and today, making plays like he always does. So good chance he's back this week. And maybe that's a good thing to get him back in game shape ahead of a big game against UCLA later this month.
All right, so let's talk Pac-12 a little bit. The big story last week was, of course, that Arizona USC game. USC getting 1-1 from Arizona. Triple overtime. USC finally pulls it out. This week, we've got probably the biggest game so far of the season, probably. And
definitely, for sure.
Yeah, in Washington and Oregon.
Yeah, obviously that's going to be a fantastic game. These are my 2 top teams right now in the Pac-12 so far this season. Obviously, USC has had its struggles. Utah's already dropped a game. Oregon State, UCLA, Washington State, all good teams, but 1-loss teams. And but these undefeated 5-0 Oregon and Washington teams, both coming off a bye. So I think that kind of adds to the intrigue in the game, just with how both of them are going to respond and how they've been game planning for the last week and a half. There's a couple Colorado kids that'll play some big roles on either side. Washington's right tackle, Roger Rosengarten, is a Valor Christian kid. He protects the blind side of lefty quarterback Michael Penix, who up until last week was leading the country in passing yards. Now it's Shedeur Sanders again. But and for Oregon, their starting tight end is a Littleton kid, Terrence Ferguson. He went to Heritage, so it's going to be an interesting game for sure. And maybe it's the Pac-12 championship game before the Pac-12 championship game, maybe. And I certainly think whoever wins this game is going to have a fast track to the playoff potentially in this league, as long as whoever wins doesn't have any more slip-ups before the Pac-12 title game, because there's going to be a lot of competition for the playoff this year. Certainly, it seems like there's a chance that there's going to be one team from each conference, no double ups, and that means somebody's champion is probably going to get left out. And I'm sure the Pac-12 would like it to not be them again, as it has been the last couple of years. So big game this week for both those teams, as they both have playoff aspirations for sure.
That'll be tough, because the Pac-12 has been probably the best conference so far this year, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, the deepest, I would say, for deepest, sure. Yeah. Obviously, the SEC and the Big Ten have the big dogs with Georgia, with Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State, all in the Big Ten. But I definitely, we saw earlier this year the Pac-12 at one point had 8 teams in the rankings, which was a record for any conference, tied a record for any conference. That was back when CU was ranked. Washington State, Oregon State, UCLA. All these teams are really good, and I feel like there could be over half the league is bowl eligible this year. Either could be 7, 8, probably 7 or 8 teams will get to bowl eligibility in the Pac-12, which is pretty crazy. Maybe even a ninth team gets there. We'll see. But I mean, it's a really great conference this year. And as we've talked about, it's just kind of a shame that it's going away after this year, because it's at its best right now for sure.
And also in the Pac-12, so USC goes to Notre Dame. I read that this is the 4th straight week that Notre Dame will play an undefeated team. Their schedule is quite brutal. Yeah, because it was it was Duke and Louisville, but who was before?
Ohio State. Yeah, Ohio State, yes. Yeah,
now it's USC coming there. I mean, USC's got their flaws. Like, they let CU come all the way back.
Yep.
USC won that game, and then I mean Arizona. What were they up 17-0 or something
Yeah,
like
they
that?
were. Yeah, or in like
Yeah.
the first quarter, I think it was like a. I remember getting back from the press conference and up to the press box to start my post game writing, and I was like, "Wow, USC's down 17-0 to Arizona at home." And obviously, I watched the end of that game after I was done writing, and it was crazy, like we've talked about. But yeah, that should be a fascinating game, at Notre Dame Stadium. Notre Dame coming off a loss to Louisville, so we'll see if who comes out of that game because they both need that game pretty desperately.
And another big one in the Pac-12 is UCLA, who's back in the rankings, and they're going to Oregon State. So both one-loss teams there.
Yeah, UCLA pulled off a pretty impressive home win over Washington State last weekend. Washington State offense kind of struggled for the first time this year. UCLA's got a really good defense. I mean, so does Oregon State. That should be a pretty physical game on both sides. I think Oregon State's like a 3.5-point favorite right now, so that's going to be a tight game. But yeah, another really good week in the Pac-12. Obviously, we got CU on Friday night, but then obviously Oregon, Washington, USC, Notre Dame, and UCLA, Oregon State. So, like we've been saying, great games in the Pac-12 every week this season.
All right, let's flip to the Mountain West and CSU. Tough game last week for them. They were up
Yeah,
17-3 after the first quarter, but ended up losing
17.
40.
Yeah, they jumped out to a 17-0 lead too. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was
And
they
then lost.
gave up 34 unanswered points.
Yeah, so I mean, a tough loss for CSU, and I think this is one that you and I kind of thought they'd pull out and would help. So what? I mean, I know you probably didn't see much of it, but what do you think from that one?
Yeah, I watched it, the morning after, just kind of trying to see what happened because I'm following along with the stats as the game's going on, and they jump out to the 17-0 lead, like we talked about. It was impressive. Torrey Horton had the punt return for a touchdown. It looked like they were gonna really put a statement win together up in Logan, and like you said, we both thought they'd pull out a close win, but they just fell apart defensively after that first quarter. I think the biggest and most jarring stat for me was they allowed over 8 yards on first down in the game. I mean, that's just you're never going to have success when you're playing defensively when you're playing behind like that on every possession. And Utah State kind of did whatever they wanted to do, running the ball, throwing the ball. And CSU just had no response until late in the game. And by that point, the game was well over with. So, yeah, disappointing effort. It seems like for CSU, they've got the stars with Horton and Mo Camara on each side of the ball, some of the best players in the Mountain West, but the depth just hasn't gotten to where they needed to be at this point. But they've got a chance to bounce back this week against Boise State at home. So we'll see what that holds.
So okay, yeah. So like you said, Boise State comes to Fort Collins. 7:45 late start Saturday night for them.
Yep.
Boise State's a little bit down. They're 3-3, but they're already 2-0 in the Mountain West. Boise's also favored going to Fort Collins. So what do we see from that one?
Yeah, Boise is it's not the team that we thought going into the year. I kind of thought they would have a chance to be that top group of 5 team, best team in the Mountain West, a chance to make the Fiesta Bowl. But it seems like they're kind of in that second tier of Mountain West teams right now, which I thought CSU could creep up into, but I don't think they're there quite yet. Behind the likes of Air Force and Fresno State, and I think Wyoming is a top tier Mountain West team right now as well, which we'll get into. But yeah, like you mentioned, Boise's a 7.5-point favorite this week. Late kickoff could benefit the Rams. We'll see. It seems like Torrey Horton is going to be a game time decision this week after getting banged up a little bit last week. He missed the entire second half. Looks like Mo Camara is going to be good to go. It seems like so. They've been banged up at running back, which might hurt them. But if there's ever a game to get a statement win for Jay Norvell this season, obviously it would have been against CU earlier this season. But now, kind of here in Mountain West play, if the Rams want to assert themselves as one of the better middle tier teams in this conference, they need to get a win at home this week against a Boise team that does have its flaws. And Boise had to make a comeback of their own last week at home against San Jose State. I think they were down 17-0 pretty early in that game, and they've been playing 2 quarterbacks throughout the season. Looks like Taylon Green, the big 6'6" quarterback, who's just electric, is gonna maybe has the job solidified back again. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'll be up there for that game. And yeah, like I said, this is definitely a game the Rams have to play well and show the rest of the Mountain West that they're not the same team that they were last year that went 3-9.
So the biggest game in the Mountain West is, of course, Wyoming heading down to Colorado Springs to play Air Force. All of our colleagues down in the Springs will have plenty of coverage of that game
Yeah.
on Saturday at 5 p.m. Air Force, big favorite, 10.5.
10.5. Yeah.
Um, I think Wyoming's probably a different team when they're not up there in Laramie. I would probably say, but man, that win against Fresno was huge for them. Real quick, it's probably it's the biggest game in the Mountain West for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's one of the biggest games this week in general, because I do think Air Force has had its struggles with Wyoming, in the past.
Yep.
It's a team that they obviously it's tough for anybody to win up in Laramie, but Air Force especially has had their struggles up there. And yeah, this is a massive game for Air Force if they're gonna prove that this is maybe even an improved version of what they've been the last couple of years, where they've had multiple 10-win seasons in a row, and they've had a lot of turnover offensively this season with personnel. A lot of guys that they had to replace in the offseason, and they haven't missed a beat. And I think they should be favorites in this game, but it's going to be tough. It's Wyoming. They're Air Force is not going to be alone in the style of play that they use. It's going to be a slow, kind of grinded out game on both sides of the ball. And turnovers in a game like this is always going to be an important factor. So, I mean, whoever turns the ball over for us, I think, is going to come out on top in this one. I mean, I'll definitely have my eye on this one for sure. But like you mentioned, our colleagues, Brent Brigham and I think Luke Zolman's going to be there as well, helping cover this game. So, yeah, this is definitely going to be whoever wins this game is going to have a fast track to the Mountain West title game, because it's the top two teams now. There's no more divisions in this conference, so top two teams will play in the championship game, and the winner of this one will, like I said, should have a fast track to get in there.
And the winner will probably jump into the rankings. Brent broke that down, I think, on Monday. About how the winner of this will probably jump up into the rankings.
Yeah, I think they're both like 27th or 28th. I don't remember the order, but they're both like right on the edge of breaking into the top 25. So for sure, the winner will definitely be in there next week.
All right, let's do predictions before we talk a little national schedule. Let's go CU first. Of course, they're playing Stanford. CU is a big favorite. They're 11.5.
Yeah, it was 12. It was 12 yesterday, but now it's down to 11.5. But yeah, I still think CU. I mean, when's the last time they were that big of a favorite against anybody that wasn't like an FCS, like a UNC type team? That's a pretty big number there. But the Stanford team, I do not think is very good. They've got their issues on both sides of the ball. I think CU is I think this is gonna be the get right game that I thought last week could have been for CU. And I do think they'll get back on track, and they'll have something maybe like a 38-14 type win. 38-13, something like that, win over Stanford, because I don't think this is a very good Stanford team. First year under Troy Taylor, good coach, but it's just going to take a while for that program to get rebuilt after the last couple of years under David Shaw. They were just kind of stuck in a road to nowhere.
All right, I think CU wins as well. I'm going to go 35-21. Yeah, like you said, I think it's a get-right game. I think they got 5 wins going into the bye week. I think nobody could ask for anything more. I think more of the question will be, if they win, will Deion be upset? I think that they better come out fast, and Shedeur better not get sacked the whole game, because I think that, and he's right. Like Shedeur cannot take that beating like that. Like they can't. And so yeah, I think they win by double digits. I mean, a good crowd, good Friday night crowd there. It should be
sold out.
It's a what?
It'll be sold out.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it a whiteout or a blackout or a gold out?
Something like that, yeah.
Who knows? I mean, so it'll be something. So, yeah, I got CU as well. All right, what about CSU Boise?
I as much as I want to pick the Rams, I want to believe that this breakout game is coming. I just don't know if it's going to be this week. I just think there might be just too much talent on the other side of the field from Boise, and I think CSU will lose a close one. I think it'll be maybe closer than some people expect, but I'm going to go 24-21 Boise State.
Yeah, I think Boise wins too. I just think that Boise just wins in the Mountain West. I just kind of think that's just what they do. So yeah, probably I think like a touchdown game, maybe 24-17, something like that. I mean, it could be higher scoring. It seems like the Rams defense has struggled. They played really well against CU for a while, but then it all kind of fell apart. And the 44 or 34 straight points last week, not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, they have stats that suggest they should be good. They have a lot of sacks. They are able to force turnovers, but they just really have been out of sync defensively. Like I mentioned, on first down, they allowed over 8 yards on first downs this past week, and that's kind of been a theme for much of the season. They feel like they've been playing behind the sticks a little bit defensively, and they get some game-changing plays on occasion, but not enough to make a difference so far. So yeah, I just don't think Boise State is going to drop this one to CSU.
All right, real quick, Air Force, Wyoming.
Yeah, I'll take Air Force. I really do think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. So I'll take 17-16 Air Force. I think the Air Force will jump out to maybe like a 10-0 lead. Wyoming responds. Maybe they go up 14-10 or a 13-10, something like that. And then Air Force has one of those grinded out drives at the end of the game to seal it. Because this is going to be one of those games I said that's won on turnovers. And maybe the Air Force gets a late turnover to seal it. But I think Air Force will pull out a win here, and because I do think this could be a special season for them. And this is the first big test. Well, they've had some big tests already, but this is the biggest of them so far.
Yeah, I just think home field's going to matter in this game. I think if this game was up in Laramie, I think it may be a little different because I think Air Force. I don't know if Air Force was undefeated going up there last year and lost. I can't remember, but I know they went up there and lost, and it was something like 16-10 or something like that too. Yeah. And I don't know, probably some driving rainstorm or something. I don't know. I don't quite remember. But as someone who has my wife has family in Laramie, so I've been there. Yeah, Air Force close. I said maybe 2017, something like that. They'll stay undefeated. They'll probably be ranked 25th on Sunday. And yeah, I mean, I have to look deeper at their schedule, but Air Force could really run the table, which would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, it could, like I said, it could be a special season down there. And our colleague Brent Brigham will have full coverage of that because, like I said, people have been emailing me dreaming about a CU Air Force potential bowl game, but I think Air Force is going to be too good for CU.
Air Force is going to get a better bowl game than that. Yeah. All right. So national schedule wise, kind of the best games we've already talked about, but what else did you like?
Yeah, the Pac-12 is certainly the best, has the best games nationally. But I mean, Miami, North Carolina should be a pretty good game. Obviously, Miami last week was the coaching disaster of the century, if you want to call it that. I can't believe they stayed in the rankings after that disaster in the final minute against Georgia Tech. I mean, I don't know how closely you were following that, but just
I saw it. Yeah.
Everybody in the press box at ASU was just dumbfounded at what was going on there. And now they have to go to North Carolina this week, play against a future top 2 NFL draft pick and quarterback Drake May, and that'll be an interesting game for sure. Around the country, Kansas Oklahoma State could be a pretty good game. Kansas bounced back last week with an impressive win after they've lost in big fashion to Texas. They beat up on UCF this past week. But yeah, I think the best games nationally are going to be in the Pac-12. I mean, this Oregon-Washington game, is the game of the year so far. And maybe it'll end up being the game of the year in general, just because even with how great that Red River rivalry game was last week, kind of one of those instant classics, but I think this Oregon-Washington game is going to be something else.
Yeah, and it's in that great window, that 1:30 window here, Mountain Time. And that'll be a good one. Yeah, the Miami stuff, like I kind of had it on in the background, and I was like, wait, what just happened? I cannot believe it. Maybe Bronco fans want to watch that game because the Broncos have a top 3 pick. Maybe they'll be interested in Drake May. So maybe
Drake May. Broncos will definitely in the next couple of weeks, months, I think, be on Caleb Williams, Drake May, Bo Nix watch for sure. I think the Broncos fans will be asking me a lot about Shedeur Sanders and some of the other quarterbacks in college football in the coming months.
We've talked about this, but I still think Shedeur stays one more year.
So do I. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, there's still going to be a plethora of really good quarterbacks available when the Broncos pick, I assume, in next April.
All right, Tyler. This is a little bit of a different week, so why don't you let people know what you have coming?
Yeah. So obviously, I've got 2 games to cover this week. I haven't been able to cover a CSU game besides the Rocky Mountain Showdown. But yeah, Friday night, 8:00 kickoff at Folsom for CU Stanford, and then the following night, 7:45 kickoff up in Fort Collins for CSU Boise State. I'll have some instant reaction type coverage for both those games, my usual 3 takeaways, and then I'll have some follow-up stories, throughout the weekend on whatever transpires out there. So stay tuned for that, and then I'll have my typical college football insider on Saturday and I'll be previewing kind of the Oregon-Washington game, because I think you can tell how excited I am to watch that game, and how big of a deal I think it is nationally for the season as a whole. So yeah, let's stay on the lookout for that. Typical coverage stuff. We'll have a Q&A with kicker Alejandro Mata for Friday's paper. We spoke to him this week after he was kind of the talk of the town over the weekend for his big kick in Tempe. So plenty of good stuff to look for.
Yeah, and so make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify, and also, we're going full now. We got everything going pretty much. Broncos play tomorrow night, so Chris Thomason and Paul Clear out in KC. Kyle Fredrickson is with the Colorado Avalanche as they open their season tonight in LA, so he's out there. So check out that. Nuggets played a preseason game last night. It is full go on sports, so make sure to check all of it out at denvergazette.com. Subscribe to this podcast. And Tyler, we will catch up next week.
All right. Thanks, Chris. See you.